We're at 2:03. Hello, everybody. My name is Anna Shevel, and I am the network coordinator of UnPoison. Many of you know me, many more of you don't. UnPoison is a NPO, a core NPO that does advocacy on agrochemicals. And also we convene a high-level expert network that is focused on pesticide advocacy, research, and awareness for our food and environment. The network consists of over 70 cross-sectoral experts, organizations, and institutions, including scientists, doctors, researchers, labs, many university departments, toxicologists, lawyers, farmers, agronomists, economists, activists, NPOs, and today we're turning our attention onto water, not only because water is such a critical resource for life, but with our lens on agrochemicals and the agricultural sector. Agriculture is the largest user of water in the country, and it also has a critical responsibility for water stewardship. So with all of the agrochemical uses in the agricultural sector, it's really important for us to understand the relationship with water and to look at the role between use, responsible use, chemical contamination, etc. So I am joining this webinar with curiosity, not because I'm an expert, and I am deeply grateful to the incredible experts that have come forward to present, and also to our wonderful host, Mark Heywood, who I will now hand over.
Thank you very much, Anna. And if I can just echo your welcome to everybody. It's great to see so many people on a Friday afternoon when most people are thinking of winding down. We're about to get wound up on the issue of what's happening to our water. And that's necessary. Because water is not only a constitutional right in South Africa, but it is vital to every aspect of life and of dignity. And we know that water is threatened and is under threat. So it's a privilege for me to co-host this webinar this afternoon. Anna briefly introduced me. My name's Mark Heywood. I'm the editor of Maverick Citizen, which is a section of the Daily Maverick. And we focus on social justice and community activism and human rights. And we try to write about the issues that really count and about the issues which are rights. So it's great to be part of this webinar. But we're going to, or I've tried to divide the presentations really into three thematic areas. So we're going to start with a couple of presentations which will provide an overview of water and of what we call citizen science. And that will be explained by the presenter of that particular input. Then we're going to move to two presentations that are to do with legislation and regulation related to water in this country, the National Water Act, and another presentation about regulation. And then we will have four presentations that are to do with hazardous pesticides, ecological risk, contamination of water resources from agrochemicals, contaminants, and so on. And I'm now going to ask Anna to just come back to introduce our first speaker, who is Ferrial Adams, who is going to be giving an overview of findings from her career in water and WaterCAN. But Anna will tell you who Ferrial Adams is. Anna, back to you.
Thank you, Mark. It has only been my recent pleasure to meet Ferrial Adams, and yeah, I'm really excited to hear about the work that she is doing with Outa. Outa is the organization against tax abuse, a government watchdog, and she is managing a citizen science program that does water testing around the country. and has held really important positions at organizations like Earthlife Africa, Greenpeace Africa, and she has her PhD in citizen science and environmental justice in SA's water sector. Ferrial, over to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ferrial Adams, and I was asked to talk about the state of our water in South Africa, in particular around the quantity and quality of water. The reality is that South Africa could have a water crisis far worse than the energy one. And that's both in terms of the quality of our water and the quantity of our water. And I will elaborate a bit on that. Regionally, we know that it is predicted that by 2025, close to 230 million Africans will be facing water scarcity. Up to 460 million will be living in water-stressed areas, and that puts an added pressure on food insecurity and poverty. And that is why tackling the state of our water is important for overall social justice. In terms of climate change, we can't talk about water without also tackling the issue of climate change. And UNICEF came up with a report that said that 74% of natural disasters between 2001 and 2018 were water-related. So mostly droughts and floods, and the frequency and intensity of these have increased tremendously with climate change. We know that as we have more droughts or floods, depending on what it is, there's the potential for diseases like cholera and typhoid, and there's also the potential for fresh water to become salty as you have more and more drought in our region. The pictures I'm showing you now are pictures of events, and I call them climate shocks, that all happened in 1 week in South Africa. That was the week of the KZN rain bomb, but we didn't hear about the floods that were happening at the same time in the Western Cape, the fires in the Western Cape, and the droughts the very bad drought in the Eastern Cape. And if anything, we need to realize that we need to look at all of these things as a whole and not in pieces, because we miss the impacts of climate change if we look at it in isolated events. In terms of water injustice, at least 2 billion people use a drinking water source that's contaminated with feces, and at least 829,000 people around the world will die from diarrhea, mostly from drinking unsafe water, bad sanitation and hygiene. And this mostly affects women and children because they, in most areas, given the responsibility to fetch water. In South Africa, what does that come to? We also will not have enough water to meet demand by 2025. That's literally 1 year and a few months away. We lose a lot of our clean potable water through leaks. The pictures that you see here are some of the impacts we're seeing in terms of the quality of our water. So you've got sewage, you've got industrial, effluent, and the one in the middle is mining. So it's acid mine drainage. And you've got agricultural effluent, you've got sewage pollution that's leading to many of our dams becoming, having high algal blooms, and affecting overall river ecosystems. And so right now we can say that 60% have been threatened by either climate change or human activities. In South Africa as well, when we talk about quantity of water, we have to talk about the access to water. And in South Africa, if you believe government, they'll tell you that 93% of South African population have access to water supplies and 76% to basic sanitation. We need to challenge how they use access, and particularly because only 46% of households have water from a tap inside their home, 27% on a property, 12% walk less than 200 meters to get water, 12% less, 6% more than 200, and 9%, almost 10%, are reliant on springs and rivers and wetlands, which we know are highly polluted. So it's not just, everyone talks about the sewage pollution, and yes, government is the biggest polluter of our water right now. But because of that, industries are getting away. Sasol has, is being accused of knowingly polluting the Vaal River system. They're still in court on that issue, but they're just one example of many. And the lack of enforcement is quite severe in South Africa, and that's the challenge we have right now. Government's Blue Drop and Green Drop report, which they come out with to tell us about the state of our drinking water and the state of our wastewater treatment, both paint very poor pictures of what is going on. 52% of our water supply systems range from medium to critical risk, and more than 60%, I would think close to 70% of our wastewater treatment works are officially classified as poor to critical. What does this mean? It means that 50,000 liters of sewage flows into our rivers every second. I think that's the equivalent of 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools every second. This is a map that, and mapping the issue is important because it gives us a picture of what we're doing. So this is a map. On the left-hand side is the Department of Water and Sanitation map. It's a lot of red dots. This is the effluent going into rivers. Not all of that is because the effluent is bad. A lot of it is because municipalities are just not testing. And because of that, WaterCAN has developed Map My Water, which is on the right-hand side. We're trying to get activist citizen science to test water, and so that we can upload real data and challenge areas where they have not been testing for a long time. And also this is controlled by activist citizen science, and we are able to tell a lot through the tests that have been done, especially since we can see the difference between water, water in taps, water in rivers and streams and beaches, etc. Activist citizen science is basically about building and challenging existing knowledge production. So, like, for example, the map, we can build our own knowledge to challenge what exists in the DWS map, but also we can test water and challenge government and say, this is what we found. If you disagree, why don't you come and test as well? It's about building a network and a movement to create change, because individuals are not going to create the change we need. And it's through the numbers that we can then shift power, or at least challenge power relations. This is our testing kit. We have two parts to it. There's the bacterial side and there is the chemical side. On the bacterial side, we have an aqua screen that looks at total coliform and a Petri film plate that could tell you the presence of E. coli. And then we have the chemical side. We look at pH, alkalinity, chlorine, hardness, nitrates, nitrites, phosphates. We have a metal strip, but we don't often include that. Only on specific requests, we add the metal strip. A couple of months ago, I did a presentation and someone said to me, but we know our water is polluted, so why should we test it? And yes, I agree. I mean, testing is only the first step. Only testing water does not guarantee change. We have to use the results that we find to mobilize, to build a movement, to amplify people's voices, to create awareness around our water resources. And especially, it's not just sewage, right? Sewage is an indicator of other things in the water, of pathogens, of industrial waste, of pharmaceutical waste, antibiotics, agricultural waste, and fertilizers. So we need to join those dots and create that awareness and build a strong movement. It's only through that collective voice that we can actually find ways to make change and to force change so that government or industry cannot ignore us. Our network is growing. In 2022, we had 77 volunteers and handed out 100 testing kits. This year, we had 866 volunteers with more than 1,500 kits that were handed out. There are challenges, we are learning, but it is a growing, and I think every time we learn, we build and we get stronger. We developing a testing a toolkit for activists so that once you test water, what can you do? We have templates for letters where you can send it to your local councillor, send it to your municipality, alert the media, all of that, so that people need assistance and we'll be their guidance to help. And when all else fails, we say we need to lay criminal charges. That's the kind of things we're doing, and it starts with testing. people are angry and people are challenging the right to clean water. We're seeing that everywhere. And I think that through activist citizen science, we know that this is going to grow, and we need to continue, because I think we cannot expect government to make the change we want to see, not at this stage. And if we're quiet and we're silent and sit back, things are just going to get worse. So yes, our water crisis should have us all on high alert. It is not going to be solved with just WhatsApp groups. We need collective voices and action. We need people to go out there and make the difference, to engage with others that can help, whether it's local councillors, whether it's the metro. We can connect to a range of people. We need to create media visibility and also have face-to-face meetings with people. It's easier to dismiss people on WhatsApp, to dismiss people online, but face-to-face changes that. And we need to follow the blame game and expose it. And through that, we want to demand accountability. And when we demand accountability is when we will see change. Thank you very much. You can find us online, and you can also email us on info@watercan.org.za.
Thank you very much, Ferrial, for that great overview. We've got a few minutes for any questions to Ferrial. If you'd like to ask a question, please just put your hand up or put a question into the chat, and I can just read it out to Ferrial. So yeah, hands up if there are any questions, and don't dilly-dally, because we don't have that much time before the next person. Debbie Muir has a question. Debbie.
Yes, sorry, thank you. Thank you, Farad. That was a very nice presentation. My question is, do you have any testing kits for chronic pesticides, their residues and transformation products, etc., etc.? Because that's what's lacking at the moment. Thank you.
Hi,
Thanks
Debbie.
a lot, Debbie.
Yeah.
Ferrial,
Yeah.
Ferrial, I just
Yeah.
want to take 2 or 3 questions, and then you'll deal with them all in one go. Any other questions to Ferrial?
Let's leave it at that, Mark.
If it's only the one question, that's great. Ferrial, can I just ask, because, okay, there's a question from Leslie London as well. Leslie?
Thanks. I put it in the chat, actually. If Ferrial could just comment whether government actually responds to citizen science that she did. It'd be interesting to know.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So
and then, Ferrial, can you also just, as a third question, tell us a little bit about WaterCAN, your Water Community Action Network, so people can understand how they can join your network and support the work that you are doing. So 3 questions, really. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Debbie, we have been approached about the pesticides as well previously, and unfortunately we don't have one. But it is a growing concern and a growing call, so we are looking into trying to get something. But then even if we don't get specific things, we're looking at, could we get an indicator test that could tell us the high levels of pesticides, etc. But at the moment, I'm sorry, we don't. And I know I've been to the farms in the Western Cape, and a lot of the farm workers are saying, please, can you share this? Because what's happening is their water source for drinking is open, and then you've got planes flying over and spraying. So they really would like that. On the question of, has government, actually, funny enough, sorry, was that Leslie that asked me the question? It's how you use it. If you just go and say, oh, we found this, they tend to ignore you. But we have set aside a few steps, like letter to your council, a letter to your municipality, and letter to your media. The letter to the councillor sometimes gets action, so then the councillor gets as concerned as everyone else. The letter to the municipality sometimes falls into a dark hole. But somehow or another, when you send it to the media, and the media then contacts the municipality, that letter finds itself back up and you have action. In some cases, they've lied. So in a Free State town, we found E. coli in the tap, and we immediately contacted the municipality saying, you need to issue a boil water notice. And they said, yes, thank you for letting us know. We will definitely do that. And we thought that they issued a boil water notice, but they didn't. And we only found out after an audit was done a year later. So they do lie. But in some cases, they have actually had engagements with the community, and they've gone back and they've done lab tests themselves. So there has been good and bad on that. In terms of WaterCAN, so WaterCAN is Water Community Action Network, with an initiative of the organization Undoing Tax Abuse. And we're an activist organization. We're trying to build awareness around water pollution and the state of our water resources. We're using activist citizen science, but we're trying to also build activist citizen science across the country, and across the divide. You know, we're going like, it doesn't, I've trained 11-year-olds how to use the testing kit. I've spoken to farm workers and they use the testing kit. They've used it in negotiations with the owners of the farms, through the unions, very responsibly done. And so we're creating that network to try and say, how do we all speak on water and create this stronger bond around it? And that's what WaterCAN is about. The situation in Joburg, for example, we are one of many who are, you know, working with different organizations, crisis committees, etc., to try and find solutions to what's going on. And that's not specific to testing, but it is about creating awareness. It is about watching how government spends their money and advocacy. But in terms of quality, you know, because they've had moments of cutting water, and if you've got water in the pipes all the time, you won't bound to get seepage of whatever it is, whether it's sewage or other kind of pollution. And then that could end up in your taps, but that's not the water that municipalities are testing. They're testing at the reservoirs. So we also have been busy running a campaign for people to test their tap water. Those are the kinds of things we've been doing. I think I covered all the questions.
You have. Ferrial, thank you so much. That's fantastic. There are still a couple of questions in the chat, which you can answer in the chat, including how to get hold of you and the Community Action Network, what the price of the testing kits are, and so on. So if you can just have a look there as well. But that was an excellent start. We're moving on. I'm sorry to everybody who's with us. You'll see that I'm going to keep chivying people along all afternoon, just because we've got quite a lot to get through. So we're staying with the theme of citizen science. Now we have Professor Jacqui Goldin, who is going to talk on citizen science and its transformative potential, engaging with emotions as a way of narrowing the gap between science and society. And Anna is just going to briefly tell us about Jacqui before she takes the stand. Thanks, Anna.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say that I will be sending all of the questions that get put in the chat that remain unanswered. They will go to our speakers. Thank you for that, Mark. We have Professor Goldin, who's an extraordinary associate professor of anthropology and water sciences, and the Center for UNESCO Groundwater and Earth Sciences. Jacqui is currently heading an international award-winning project entitled Diamonds on the Soles of Their Feet, involving ordinary citizens consisting of farmers and farm laborers working alongside scientists by using their smartphones to gather valuable data pertaining to groundwater. Really looking forward to your talk. Over to you, Jacqui.
So it's really great to have Ferrial preceding me, because I think what we've got in common, obviously, is a passion for citizen science. We're coming from a different angle. I think Ferrial's angle, which is incredibly important, is the advocacy and the activism. I think from our side, I see activism coming from being able to give science, take it away from elite sort of ownership of science, and bringing it to society, to people. In Diamonds on the Soles of Their Feet, we're working with kids. Sorry, Anna, are you managing to get the presentation up?
Jacqui, unfortunately it says that the size is too big for me to show. So you might just have to talk through it without the slides, which is also very engaging.
Okay, it's a pity because basically I've got no words on my presentation. I've only got faces of children, faces of kids who are really for the first time engaging with the idea of water and of themselves being custodians, if you like, of the water. So we've had two prongs to this project. First of all, just to say, in 2019, we started looking at groundwater levels in wells. And then there was this huge kind of outcry from communities saying, yes, of course, we want to know the groundwater levels, but we want to know about the quality of our water, because our water is really bad quality. So unfortunately, in these slides, you can't see, but I mean, I've got some horrendous kind of renderings of pools or wetlands or rivers where people are drinking from the water. And it's, you know, the little test kit that we've got from Ferrial, it's black. It's really, really undrinkable and dirty. And there's cattle poo all over, you know, it's just livestock sharing the same places. So it's really it's sad and it's shocking to see. And a lot of people in the Limpopo, in these very rural areas where I've been working, are having that problem of water quality. So there was this outcry, please can we start measuring water in the rivers and wetlands and also in the wells. So we've used the United Nations Freshwater Quality Kit, which is nitrates, phosphates, and turbidity, and coliform and E. coli from Ferrial's kits, and then the mini SAS. I must just say the one the concern that I have is that these are mainly off-the-shelf kits and they are expensive. And so the sustainability of communities being able to continue to measure their water quality is compromised. So I think we really all need to look at that together. And I know the Water Research Commission is working quite hard on that to see how we can have tools that are you know, that don't cost anything, that are available to communities. Yeah, so my presentation is just showing the faces of these kids. Water literacy in the classroom. So we're going into the classrooms and teaching about water, and the kids are just so excited. The principals are excited in the schools. The teachers are excited, saying, please, can you do another school? We're doing 7 schools only at the moment and 1 classroom in each school. So that's 210 kids altogether. Please, can you come to our school? Please, can you go to another classroom? So there's really this kind of enthusiasm. Kids are writing poems about water. They're drawing pictures about water. They're doing dances about water. So there's this engagement with water. Then we take them out of the classroom to the rivers. And that's where we use our freshwater monitoring kits and other kits. And this one little boy, I mean, just to quote, he said, oh, I didn't know that when you spoke about a nitrate, I was scared. I thought this is too difficult for me. But now the kids know what is a nitrate, what is a phosphate. They watch the pink go to purple. They watch the change of the color, picking up whether the water is full of nitrates or not. Just to say, in this particular area, we didn't have high nitrates or phosphates because I think it's not really a farming area, so we didn't have too much of that. But clearly, there was a lot of E. coli and coliform, and clearly the water is not okay. Yeah, so I think for me, it is this power of citizen science to share science, and through that to transform the way kids, in our case it's kids, but they're from the age of 10 to 18, engage with their environment. So I think that getting those messages, working closely with somebody like Ferrial, then okay, you've got this information, what are you going to do? You're going to lobby the municipality, you're going to lobby the councillors, you're going to go one step further. We're hoping to spread out to other districts in the Limpopo and to other provinces, because it's beyond my expectation in the sense of the absolute joy and excitement. Just to say something about what I'm writing at the moment about emotions and science. I don't think that emotions are a nice to have. I don't think joy, hope, feelings of pride. I don't think they're nice to have. I think they're drivers of social action. If you're feeling joy, if you're feeling curiosity, if you're feeling hope, you're going to do something. You're going to go to the river, you're going to care about it. So if science doesn't have any emotional impact on you, I don't think it's going inside, and I don't think it's going to be a driver for social action. So I'm very into kind of how do you work with emotions? How do you activate, these feelings of joy, these feelings of curiosity or fear? Sometimes it's like, oh, this is really dirty, this is awful, I'm scared, I feel afraid. I think those are very valid, a very valid part of science. So I'm into the communication of science. I'm sorry I can't show you here on the presentation. We use comic boards, graphic facilitation to get messages across so that they're very accessible, and just sort of, again, this bridge between science and art and science and emotions. I don't know how many minutes I've had, Mark, but just to say, I've got 2 left. Okay.
2 left.
What I found really shocking is not just the lack of access because there aren't taps, but the lack of access because the pumps aren't working, because and that poor people, I think, I find it really, scandalous. I think when I was in Germany recently, I used the word disgusting, that poorer people or people in remote areas are actually paying an awful lot for water. Like a couple of the citizen scientists that I'm working with, when there is no water, there are water tanks that come along, and Dora is paying much more for her water. She buys for 3 months at a time. She's paying much more for her water than I do in my house in Cape Town. So I think, and she's suspicious. She says that she thinks this water tanks are being run by private sector, and there's almost a colluding, or whatever the word is, going on between these private water tankers. So I think, and it's worsened a lot because of load shedding, that the pumps don't work then, and there's a time when you can't get the 6 hours or whatever you need to get that pump going, so you're deprived of water. The municipality have put water tanks there, but they're empty. They haven't been filled. So there is no access unless you're going to pay, and you're going to pay a lot more than the wealthier people pay. So I think that almost somebody called, Barbara Schreiner, called this weaponization of water. She was talking about Palestine and Gaza being cut off. But I think there's something that this water is, there is something to do with this weaponization, that you don't have it and people with money can get it, and others, like, almost like get a gun or get an arm, you can get your water and protect yourself, and others can't. I think that's about all I have to say. I'm so sorry I can't share these absolutely amazing pictures of these kids, because that's really what my presentation was about. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jacqui. You did a brilliant job describing your pictures. We can almost see them, and we get from the enthusiasm of your presentation just exactly what it's about. We'll see if we can find a way to share the pictures, but really touch on very, very important points. Again, can I see anybody who would like to speak or ask questions? Hands up very quickly, please.
I have a question.
See Anna. Any other? Anna, go ahead while we're seeing if there's anybody else.
Jacqui, I wanted to ask, the kids full of joy and curiosity and having the world of water come alive through your work, how do you give them hope with the findings?
I think that engagement, that kind of, one thing, for instance, we had on Earth Day, the kids took paper and plastic and whatever pollutants away from the river bank. So they had a sense of kind of, we want to keep our rivers clean. So the idea that a school will adopt a river. So these rivers, each of the 7 schools has a river near it. So I think, there's a sense of ownership, but also, I don't know, perhaps more in the long run, like a couple of these kids who want to become scientists, who want to learn more, they're going to become the future doctors, the future professors, the future custodians of water. I don't know if that answers you, but for me, it's just, this is mine. It's my river. I own it. I'm proud of it. I'm going to tell mommy and daddy, do not take a plastic bag to the shop when you go. So it's sort of on that level. But I do need to be working more closely with Ferrial, I think, you know, sort of, because Ferrial's taken it one level further, writing letters to the municipality. Maybe letters from the kids with photographs of the kids could be a really powerful way of getting some messages across.
Sounds like I have one more thing. You touched on toxic business and the toxic business with water privatization. And I think that that's just also something that goes hand in glove with the contamination we see also in the food system and everywhere else. While we're looking at contamination, we have to look at toxic business and, you know, the way that business is conducted. And very much so the tax that poor people pay for all of the things that we get to enjoy. I see Debbie also has a hand up.
Debbie, do you want to ask your question, and then Jacqui can, yeah.
Yes, mine is quick. Jacqui, how do you link with the river health programs, the Working for Rivers, all the government initiatives which are citizen science projects, to try and link together with that? Because there is also a section in the citizen science, I think it's the River Health Project, that actually looks at school projects, to start on the school, because in about 2009, I think we managed to get river contamination, etc., into the curriculum for Standard 7, I don't know what that is now, Grade 9 in the Northern Cape. So, and then unfortunately, I moved into another unit, but it is possible. So we used citizen science and schools with different work that they were doing then, and we managed to get it into the curriculum. So then we were working with the Department of Education at the same time. So that's what these programs do. So I think that there's quite a good link that you can link up with those so that you can grow your program. Thanks.
Yeah, just quickly, Debbie, and also Ferrial brought up, you know, how someone asked the question, how does it get to government? We've been really fortunate to have government on board. We've got Nolayizo Mabitsa, who runs the Adopt a River program. She's on our advisory committee. So yes, but thank you, Debbie. I think I'll get hold of you after this and follow up on some of those initiatives. Yeah, but I think government is more and more acknowledging citizen science, both because it fills a hydrological void. They can't get to these remote areas and monitor, but also because of the way society can be involved in more participatory action.
Thank you so much, Jacqui, for your presentation. Can I ask that you put your contact details in the chat, and any website that you have where people can access materials and more information about your work and your writings, and if every speaker could do that, because part of the purpose of this afternoon is to network and to build relationships and work out how we can all work better together on these issues. But thank you so much, Jacqui. That was very helpful. So we're shifting from citizen science now, although it will remain a bedrock of everything that we are talking about this afternoon, and moving into the legislative and regulatory framework. I think it's very important, too, that we keep in mind this afternoon that our Constitution says that everybody has a right to sufficient water. That's a constitutional injunction, our supreme law. And when it says sufficient water, it doesn't just mean sufficient water, it means sufficient potable, clean, usable, safe water. So to build on that, the first of two speakers on kind of legislative regulatory issues is Katli Ngwane, who is going to be talking about the National Water Act 36 of 1998, why it was created, why it's lauded, the good, bad, and its failings in terms of the responsibility of government to uphold it. And I'll ask Anna just briefly to introduce Katli properly to us. Anna, back to you again.
Thank you, Mark. Katli is a formidable woman in the agricultural sector. She consults with a lot of the sector. She's a lawyer and focused on agricultural law. She was listed as in the Forbes 30 under 30, as well as 100 Mandelas of the Future, and awarded Global Citizen Visionary for Sustainable Outlook and Activism by Hewlett Packard. And one of the things that excites me most is part of UnPoison's core work is to look at legislation and how to use legislation for advocacy to ensure that we're able to enforce our rights. And so I'm very curious to hear what Katli has to share with us. Over to you, Katli.
Hi all. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope I'm clear. I've been having issues with my laptop all week, so I hope everybody can hear me. My name is Katli Ngwane. Thank you so much for the opportunity. As Anna said, I am a lawyer. I specialize in environmental law, but water being what it is, I've become the water girl, because it's quite a contentious issue. The National Water Act, which is what I want to talk to you guys about, replaced the 1956 Act, which used to basically say, if you buy a piece of land, whatever water you find there is yours. This act that we're talking about then came around and said, no, hold on, that doesn't work like that. Water now is nationalized because we have a need to protect it, to manage it, and to conserve it, because regardless of how people think or what they believe to know, South Africa is a water scarce country. We do not have the kind of rivers in this country compared to, let's say, Europe or any other places in the rest of the world. So there's a conservation part of it, there's a management part of it, and it goes a lot into the fact that industry like agriculture, mining, all of that, before this act would do whatever they want. So they would put their waste in water resources, and then, a year or two later, we hear about finding poo in our taps, and people are dying in certain townships because upstream you've got some chicken farm or a chicken slaughter abattoir or a mine that is just dumping their waste on it. So it is an amazing act. It is lauded actually throughout the world as the best water act that has ever been enacted, because in theory it is well in tune with covering everybody and everybody's interests, and the fact that we cannot allow industry like agriculture, mining, your very heavy waste industries to pollute our water and not take into account the other uses of water in this country. The other thing that it does, of course, as well, is to make sure that some of the issues that we have in the past in terms of apartheid and the discrimination that we saw, we know that there's a lot of parts in this country that do not have clean water, do not have running water, don't even have taps. So another reason it was enacted is to manage that how do we make this resource that is so important to life available for everybody, and not just for the rich or those that can afford it or those that need it because they believe their industry is the most important. There must be, a balance between how it's used, how it's conserved, and how do we make sure that everybody gets the privilege, and it shouldn't be a privilege, but the opportunity to get water. So it's one of my favorite acts. I believe in it. It's well written. Everybody in the world says so that it is. And, if you go through it and you compare it to other water acts since it came into place, everybody's copied our Water Act. It's literally copy and paste, whether it's Swaziland, Namibia, Lesotho, all over Africa, they've literally copied this act that we have. So basically what it says is that you are now, like gold, you have to get a permit or a license in order to use water for whatever activity that you are doing, obviously except for domestic use. So if I have a borehole at home, I'm probably not going to use that much water, so that is fine. I don't have to have a license for that. But anything above 2,000 cubes per year of water, it says you must approach the Department of Water and Sanitation to get permission and a license to use that water, and you must state what are you using that water for, and how does it work, and how much water are you using. So you can't come to them and say, oh, I just need 1 million cubes of water, without justifying exactly to the T, to the liter, what is 1 million cubes for. And they become so good at it that they are able to sort of contradict you if you say that, and they're like, yeah, but according to our maps and our research about a certain place, There's no way there's 1 million cubes of water, for example, or your activity that you're doing, whether it's mining, whether it is in agriculture, does not need 1 million cubes, all right? But then another thing that they put out there is to say, even if it is 1 million cubes that you need, what is the methods and the technology you're using to make sure that that use is efficient and beneficial? You know, so they have this, you know, very clever way of saying, fine, justify the amounts, but then on the back of it, what are you doing to make sure that you're conserving? You know, so even if we gave you 1 million, how do we know, you know, that you're making sure that you're not wasting? So they're forcing farmers, for example, to meter their usage. So they're forcing farmers to prove that you're using the best technology, the latest technology, to not waste water at all, right? And to conserve it and to save it all the time. So it's a very good thing, and it's got 11 uses that covers wastes, that covers, you know, dams, covers the pumping of water. Where are you pumping it? Is it in winter? Is it in summer? Is it necessary? Is it drought time at the moment, or do we have rain? Because if we have rain, it's a different story. And I love the fact that DWS, Department of Water and Sanitation, are very specific about it in terms of the enforcement of it, that you will not be able to do anything on your farm if you do not have the requisite licenses. And I also like the fact that they're not saying that we want to be the boss of water in a negative way, that they will arbitrarily say no to anybody wanting to apply for a license. It's more, no, we want to see that you understand the responsibility that you have and the burden that you have, that you must conserve the water and do it properly. And where I've enjoyed it personally is that for the first time, farmers have to think about this. So if it's a dairy farm, they have to think about what happens to the waste of your cows, you know, the poo of your cows, where does it go? You know, and that's a license in itself, an application in itself, that we have to say to the department, this is where it goes. This is how we make sure it doesn't end up in a water resource when it rains. This is how I'm managing my pastures and all of that. So then, you know, in the long run, it protects our people, us normal people that have to open the tap, you know, that our water resources, the nearest water resource to those dairy farmers or the cow farmers is not contaminated by their activities. And so, you know, basically that's the greatness of it, you know. So you get about 11 licenses and it covers it all. And people think that the Water Act is just about water rights, just about pumping or storing. It really goes deep into wastes, into, you know, sort of engineering parts of it in terms of what is Eskom doing, you know, because they also need water rights and all of this. It covers every single industry you can think of in terms of water use, and that's why it's an amazing piece of legislation. So that's the good part. The bad part about it is the fact that execution and enforcement is an issue. So this act has been around since 1998, but unfortunately, we can't enforce it enough. There's a lot of small corners in this country where people are still doing as they please, you know, and they still, you know, don't care, and waste does end up, you know, in our water resources. And then we hear the stories in the newspapers about a township or a community being poisoned, or E. coli has been found in their water and all of that. So the bad of it is that DWS does not have the capacity, you know, as yet. And I hope, you know, they will endeavor to build up the capacity to be able to have enforcement enough to check every single crevice of this country, to make sure that everybody that's a water user is doing so responsibly, from, you know, a conservation and management, and also the fact that they are not polluting our water resources and they're protecting our water resources. So that's the bad part. And that's where the government fails, I suppose, because they don't have the capacity, or maybe just don't know how to manage it all at the same time. Where it's also been abused, right, is that you then have people that are, you know, coming in, applying for water use licenses and lying, you know, and lying about the need of the water that they need, because now they're allowed to sell it. There was a constitutional court case about 1.5 years ago, and the constitutional court said, look, you can trade in water, you know, and the farmers were very excited about it, because it means the more water I have, I can make it a business on the side. If I have extra water, I can sell it. And because water is so valuable for the industry, it amounts to a lot of money. You know, it's not 2 rand per liter, it's easily 2,000 rands per liter, you know. And I think that's where the abuse comes in. And for me, it's been a bit of a concern, that constitutional judgment, because it opens it up to full abuse that we've seen and we've experienced since that court case came to be, because then now it's an opportunity and not necessarily a proper use and a need in terms of your particular enterprise as a farmer. Potential solutions. I think that as private citizens, as businesses, as society, we really need to be able to report, first of all, the misuse of water wherever we see it, you know, and not be quiet about it, whether it's a farmer or it's just, you know, municipalities or whatever the case might be. We need to speak a lot more about it, because like I said, I think people don't realize how water scarce South Africa is. You know, we don't have water resources at all compared to like a Lesotho, you know. And it's not just about, you know, abuse in terms of saving water. It's more about, you know, guys, we don't have water. So it's not a drought we're talking about. It's not day 0 that happened in Cape Town. It's not about that. It's that generally we do not have water. And in my opinion, you know, if we don't start standing up and talking more about it, about the seriousness of it, we will go to war over it at some point, you know, and it'll be a big issue in the country, which will bring us back into sort of the social side of it, that it will be a have versus have not situation, that those that have money will be the ones that have water, and those that can't afford it, you don't have water. So I think, I know I only have a few minutes, so I think that's the best I can do. I could go on for hours about it, but, you know, just as a wrap up and sort of the issues about it and, you know, what I do and the acts, that's me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katli. That was really excellent. I mean, one of the things that I take from that is that we can have citizen science, which is really important, but we also need to have citizen lawyers and people who are legally literate and know rights and legal frameworks, such as you've sketched out very well, but very briefly. I saw there's quite a lot of chat and quite a number of questions or comments on what you've been saying in the chat. But can I ask if there are any questions to Katli? Again, put your hand up quickly if you have any questions, technical questions about the law. There's a question from Ferrial Adams. Any other questions? Ferrial, go ahead with your question.
Thanks, Mark. It's a quick one. I mean, I think for me, what I'm concerned about is and you're right, Katli, that we do have some good policy. It needs better enforcement, but there are changes, and there are changes being proposed, which allows or almost opens up the door for privatization of our water resources. Do you know anything of that? And because I'm trying to find the new the new kind of draft and to comment on that, because I think that's something we need to keep our eye on.
Thanks. Katli, hold that, because there's 2 more questions that I'm seeing. Leslie Petrik, first of all, and then Leslie London.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
My question has got to do with the fact that, as a previous speaker, I think it was Ferrial, mentioned that the Department of Water and Sanitation is one of the biggest polluters of our water sources. How does the legislation deal with government functions that are not dealing with the resource carefully? I mean, most of our rivers are running sewers these days.
Thank you very much, Leslie. Leslie London.
So thanks a lot. So I understand that the Water Act also provides for a water tribunal, which is meant to provide redress to citizens. Also, I understand that the tribunal hasn't had a chairperson or hasn't had a operating official. Anyway, I just wonder if you want to comment on the role of those sorts of structures in law that provide citizens with means of redress, and how effective you think it is.
Thanks, Leslie. And then, Katli, if you can just take one last question. This will be the last one from Helen Dodge. Helen?
Hi there. Thanks very much. I'd like to ask you, please, I'm on the south coast of KZN, and we're working on protecting one of our rivers and estuaries. And I'd like to know, in terms of the Water Act, it includes provisions for a comprehensive reserve determination as well as estuarine reserve requirements. And we've been speaking to municipality consultants, EIA practitioners, and all of these people, and they seem to be ignoring this. We've asked for this information from the water provider, the municipality, on a number of occasions, and also from the DWS, and we've never received any feedback. And I'm wondering if they're ignoring it because they don't want to talk about it, or whether it maybe carries less weight than it used to. Is there any chance that can happen with the Act? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, the other questioners. Katli, back to you.
Thank you so much for the questions. In terms of privatization, of water, that's not going to happen, Ferrial, because the only amendments that are coming, and they've suggested, and I believe it's going to happen, is that they're just going to intensify, what the Act says. So where they've got frustrated with people just sort of ignoring the Act and doing as they please, we've seen in the last year or two, I've had about 4 clients that were criminally charged for misuse of water activities. And, it's section 151 of the Act, where it says that you can be criminally charged and you also can be fined. And they've started doing it. And it's the first time I've always been aware that there is, some sort of enforcement clauses where they can do it. And only in the last year or two, I've seen them actually enforce it. And at the same time, in this year, they've announced that, look, we're going to force you guys even harder, that if you want a water use license from us, we're going to be very specific about what we want. And one of the amendments is the fact that, if you want a water use license, you have to be 60% Black owned, and you have to be, so what in my personal opinion is that they've become so frustrated with the enforcement of it that they're going to force it through legislation, and that's the only amendment I'm aware of. Water is nationalized in this country, just like mining, so you can't, just because you found gold on your property, it doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the government. And that's the position of the government. And I don't foresee that happening. And from that perspective, if you're talking about privatization in terms of, private businesses with water bottling and all of that, then there's something else, but in terms of our water resources, our wetlands, all of that, that is nationalized. And that's the position of government, that it will never be, a resource that is privatized or allowed to be privatized, for the same reason, that then it opens up, abuse of it, and also danger to the rest of the population of South Africa that needs to be protected. In terms of the DWS being the biggest pollutant, my answer to that would be, it's the tender system. We know the other day what happened in Pretoria, in the township in Pretoria, that somebody got a tender to do the treatment plant. He did it shoddily or half, or didn't do it at all, but he got paid. And the next thing we know, children and people are dying, and the whole township is in every hospital in Pretoria we can think of. So for me, it's more the tender system of not vetting who are you hiring to do a job, because this job is so important, because if it's not done properly, you might kill people down the line. It's not something to play with, so I wouldn't say so much that it's DWS polluting. I would say that it's generally the system of the fact that things get tendered out and some guy gets it and just doesn't do the job and doesn't realize how risky and important the job is that he's tendered for, I don't have a problem with the tender system as long as you're an engineer, you know what you're doing, and you're a specialist and you're a scientist, and you can make sure that that treatment plant works and it's not going to poison anybody. In terms of the Water Tribunal, you are correct. The Water Tribunal didn't have a chairperson sort of last year, but and early this year, but we do now. It has been reconstituted, and we have had decisions from them, but there's a huge backlog. But we have had some decisions. So just last week, one of my Water Tribunal matters, we got a decision. I find them to be a very, very fair body, you know, to use, but I wouldn't use it all the time if we are wrong, you know. So I always say to clients, let's look at the act and let's make sure that we've covered everything, because what is the point of going to the tribunal if we are wrong anyway? You know, if you've already built the dam and it's illegal and you don't have a license for it, why would we appeal the decision of the DWS to say to you, demolish that dam? You know, and I find that people abuse it, but actually if you use it properly, you will get the proper results, because they're not DWS. They're very, very independent, like the labor courts, like these smaller courts that have to deal specifically with a specific sector within the country. So, you know, labor court sits in Johannesburg. It's nothing to do with a magistrate's court or a high court, you know, and the water tribunal is very similar. So it is available for everybody. It does work. It is back constituted, and the chairperson is there. In terms of what's happening in the South Coast and the municipality and all of that, I'll be honest with you. My work in the KZN and the Department of Water and Sanitation KZN, I found them to be one of the most difficult offices I've ever encountered in the whole country. And I'm based in the Western Cape, but I work the whole country, you know, and I've never seen an office like that in terms of the bureaucracy, the red tape, the inability to answer people, the unfairness of it, you know. Just recently I wrote an email to Pretoria to say, listen, your KZN office has gone rogue. You know, they seem to be emotional about things, or they are police officers over water, but I that's not my understanding of their role, you know. So my suggestion would be to go straight to Pretoria, because Pretoria, again, has no skin in the game. They really, really believe in this act and they want things done properly all the time. And I've had a lot of help from Pretoria when I get frustrated with the regional offices that, hey, help me out here, because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, you know. And that's where I've been successful, that I've been very, very good and formed relationships with the guys in Pretoria to say, what's going on here, you know. And I use it in a humble way to say, please educate me, because it is your responsibility anyway as custodians of water, that if we're getting it wrong, educate us and tell us how, you know, for us to be able to carry on. So I'm not surprised that you're a bit frustrated with the South Coast, because they are particularly a special case in my opinion. Thank you.
Katli, thank you so much. That was really rich and helpful. Various people, I think we need a water law project, and you to head the water law project. I also think that all of us need Water Act literacy and the institutions that work around water. But that's the purpose of this webinar, is to identify gaps and needs and maybe to come up with strategies to fill those things. I hope there are a couple of journalists on this webinar, because I also raised issues that I think should be pursued by journalists and the media to investigate unresponsive government departments and unlawful conduct and so on and so on. So thank you, Katli, fantastic. And again, please, if you don't mind, put your contact details for people. You may get swamped. That's probably not the best word to use here, but yeah, you've been very helpful. Thanks a lot. So we're moving on now. The next presenter is Dr. Debbie Muir. We've already heard her in the chat.
Mark, I think it's Sharon Pollard.
Oh, sorry. No, you're right. Quite right, Anna. We're staying with law and regulation. The next speaker is Sharon Pollard, and Sharon is talking on water catchment management agencies, decentralized water governance as a place for regulation. And Anna is going to introduce Sharon. Apologies for my mistake.
No problem. I just also want to admire Katli's unflappable skills. That just shows what an excellent lawyer she is, that she remained completely focused even while she was being photobombed during her talk. And also just to say, somebody said, you said, Mark, that we need a water law network or group. With all of the speakers on this webinar, I have pulled together the start of UnPoison Our Water, looking at doing something similar to what we've got on pesticides. So if there are other experts in this audience that would like to be part of a civil society expert water network, please let me know. And without going on even more, I met Sharon a couple of years ago. Sharon has been part of the UnPoison network for a while, and my understanding about water and water management was just so incredibly deepened through talking to Sharon about her work. So I'm looking forward to handing you over to Sharon. She comes from working with an organization called Award, and she has a focus on integrated catchment management and planning and implementation. I didn't know what all of that was. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Sharon now.
Sharon, we can't hear you. We can see your first slide, but we can't hear you.
Hold on.
Hello. I'll just greet everybody. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Anna. So I'm just going to take on from the last speaker from Katli and just talk a little bit more around decentralized water governance. And I'm going to try and make it as unbureaucratic as possible. I know how these things can be. And really just looking at CMAs or catchment management agencies as a place for participation and regulation. Sorry, my slide is not moving. There we go. So, I mean, I think people have already mentioned this growing water insecurity. You can see a range of photographs here that are indicators that we are headed for kind of less water security rather than improvement in our water security. The right-hand picture, the top one is the latest one. It's a deformed fish in the Vaal, and the state vet who looked at that was just saying he thinks that's something to do with probably pathogens and or pesticides. We've seen a whole slew of kind of comments hitting the media, thanks to the Mail and Guardian. There's a lovely excuse me, title on the right, A River of Shit, Chemicals and Metals Flow Through Our Land. They've done quite a good job of trying to keep that on our screen, and we've also seen protests and contestations. I think, Leslie, you'll know the one on the right, where there's this contestation between science and people sort of refuting that. And there are very little signs of this abating, particularly in terms of the increased mining and the push for commodities, increase in agribusiness, which is no longer family-owned business, but big consortium businesses, and the push for development. I put a slide up there on the right, which shows you the truck queues going to the Komati-Poort border with coal. That's between South Africa and Mozambique. They're going to Maputo. And that goes on for over, I think it's 19 kilometers. We've also had people like Tony Turton talking about the tsunami of sewerage and saying we need to convince our political leadership to do things differently. We've seen stuff coming out on various rivers in KZN, but just really all over the country. And the question that I'm sort of addressing today is, how is this meant to be regulated? And we've heard bits and pieces on that now. But really what the National Water Act said is there should be decentralized water governance with national oversight. And that allows people to participate. They're going to set standards, and they're going to also get going on compliance monitoring and enforcement. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but we've got other things like the blue and green drop reports that monitor sewage works. The previous Minister Mokonyane put that on hold for a while, so we didn't even know what was going on. We've got the blue scorpions. We've also been pretty good at putting up benchmarks. And then there has been some work on trying to get the police and the courts to understand what they call environmental crimes. All right, so let's just turn to this word regulation and how we see it in South Africa. There's two components, compliance monitoring and then an enforcement component. And there's an argument that you can't be the referee and the player. So compliance monitoring often happens by a different slew of capacitated people to the enforcement section. And really, CMA stands for Catchment Management Agencies, and I'll talk a bit about those. But it's really at that level that the local, let's say more localized regulation is meant to happen. And despite this, it's taken the most enormous amount of time for this to really get up and running, and even so, we're way behind schedule. 2015, 2016 was the first time that the National Department actually even reported on CME. They have actually established now a Chief Director for Water Use and Compliance Monitoring Enforcement, so that's a positive. So CMAs, for a lot of people that don't know, we're meant to have wall-to-wall catchment management agencies. A catchment, for people that don't know, is what in school you would have learned about. It's a watershed or a river basin. But obviously our country's got wall-to-wall river basins, and these CMAs manage a whole lot of river basins. And they become incredibly important in terms of a whole lot of functions, but in terms of regulation. And under the CMAs, you have catchment management committees, and for all of you, catchment forums. And I can't stress how important these catchment forums are. They're the platform on which these various pieces of information around water quality and quantity get shared between stakeholders, and it is the way for stakeholders to ostensibly to get the power to participate. And there's, I've heard a lot of people saying, oh, we need to go to a local authority. There's a certain element of truth in that, but water resource management functions sit under CMA, and they're meant to coordinate with local municipalities who are the water services authorities. These CMAs are meant to then develop what is known as a catchment management strategy. Please don't worry about the details in this, but the strategy talks to water resource protection and regulating water use, and it holds the functions for monitoring and regulating. All right, so it all sounds wonderful. We've also got these benchmarks. Someone mentioned the reserve, which is an amount of water that needs to be left, for example, in rivers or wetlands to satisfy basic human needs and environmental health. And to do that, we set these things called resource quality objectives, and they're both a numeric and a narrative. And they can include water quality. So an RQO might state, for example, the water quality from the Olifants River must be acceptable for irrigation of crops, and the yellow fish in this river should be maintained. So it's pretty descriptive. These resource quality objectives, they are being set for most of the rivers in South Africa at the moment. Some of these RQOs from work we've done, they're RQOs missing for certain important things which the UnPoison group is concerned about: pharmaceuticals, hormones, petrochemicals, and some of the other contaminants of concern. Okay, so that's all fine and dandy, but in reality, what's happening? A key challenge in our country, we hear this all the time, it's not just the water sector, is around regulation and unlawful water use and non-compliance with benchmarks. I just want to talk very quickly about this litany of an extraordinary timeline of institutional confusion that has left people kind of scratching their heads. We had the 1998 Water Act, as we know, that set up 19 catchment management agencies. I'll show you a map just now. And they were all meant to have been established, very ambitious, by the year 2000, which is when I got involved. And then in 2012, they hadn't been established, and they decided to cut the 19 down to 9. And in 2015, the then Minister of Water Affairs withdrew some of the powers. And by that stage, we had 2 CMAs, the Inkamati Osuthu and the Brio de Goritz. And the powers they had, particularly around regulation, were withdrawn, and that caused a huge amount of confusion. And then in 2017, Water Affairs then said, well, they're not going to do these CMAs anymore, they're going to create one CMA. It became quite shocking, and it was very obscure as to how that differed from Water Affairs. 2018, the new minister then came back in and said, we're going to re-establish these 9 CMAs. And as of this year, we're down to 6 CMAs. That's been in the National Water Resources Strategy. So there we go. It really has caused a lot of confusion. And added to that, without too much detail, has been this transformation of irrigation boards to water user associations which is meant to allow for participation. There are the CMAs there. They're incredibly important in terms of water resources management and for our purposes for CME. So you can look at that map and see where you lie. These are now mega areas, which for a number of us is a real problem. Victor Munnick wrote some stuff on this, why a CMA is important, and we gave inputs to this. They're really important because they're able to focus on water quality and protection of water resources, and they allow for us to participate. So I suppose to end, how do we ensure that these environmental rights for people are upheld? You see a woman bathing in the Witbank area in acid mine drainage on the right. I think, as you said, it's no joke. So how do we bolster catchment compliance monitoring and enforcement? Our monitoring networks, particularly for flow in South Africa, are collapsing. A lot of the gauge stations are collapsing. So getting flow data becomes incredibly difficult. Water quality is equally as weak, if not weaker. It's much more difficult to monitor. We struggle to get real-time data for both of those. So obviously, if there's a water quality problem and a spill, for example, if you don't have real-time data, it's very hard. Get citizens involved. We simply do not have enough staff within government or CMAs to do this level of monitoring and get them involved. That's been spoken about, and get people to participate in CMAs. And I think most importantly is making sure that we have these networks for collective actions, that we work together, much like this UnPoison group. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. That's really excellent. And
you're muted, Mark.
Am I really? I shouldn't be muted.
No,
I'm not muted. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. No, I was just saying thank you, Sharon. That was really excellent and enlightening. If you can take your last slide down now, just so I can see hands of people who may have questions that they want to ask to you. But again, just listening to you, it strikes me how strong in theory the regulatory framework is and how weak in practice, and how much of that is to do with the fact that ordinary people, including ordinary people who are concerned about these issues and working on these issues in local areas, just don't know the law. I mean, I must say, I think I'm a fairly informed person, but I knew very little about catchment management authorities until 10 minutes ago. So there's a job to be done there. But can I ask if there are any questions to Sharon? Quickly, we've got a few minutes. I've seen that there's been plenty going on in the chat, but I see Ninette Tarleton. Ninette, your question, and then Debbie. Ninette?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. It's Ninette, then Debbie, then Jacqui, and then that's it. Thanks. Go.
I just wanted to ask where our springs fall into this and the monitoring of our springs. For example, in Cape Town, if we talk about Newlands Spring and the fact that we've got it in the middle of an urban area where the local authority sprays herbicides on the roads, as well as up in the mountain, the spraying of alien invasives is taking place. And I have contacted the local authority. It seems like there's no monitoring of the water quality. And I'm just wanting to know how that's dealt with.
Thank you. Sharon, you'll answer all the questions one time. Debbie.
Sorry, my question is not a question. It's sort of both, a question and a comment to Sharon. Sharon, don't you think we should look at citizen science on an intergovernmental platform rather? So instead of having citizen science platforms for DWS and one for DFFE and one for agriculture, to maybe look at a combined citizen science platform, because all of the legislation and the activities are interlinked. Because if you're spraying pesticides, which is agriculture, on agricultural crops, it's going to impact your water, which is now going to impact you. So, and it's going to then impact us as DFFE, because there might be an impact on on environment and biodiversity. So shouldn't we rather then look at a citizen science combined and maybe take all our citizen science platforms that we have to the Citizen Science Association for South Africa maybe? So maybe go to one central hub maybe and say, all right, we've got all these platforms, and say, let's try and see if we can have a one-stop shop kind of platform to basically try and integrate all the data so that we don't lose anything. It's just a suggestion from my side. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Jackie, Jacqueline Goldin, do you still want to question? Yeah.
I suppose I just wanted to say, following on from what Debbie says, that I think that citizen science can really fill a void where government can't do the work that's needed. But I think what's also very frustrating, and there again, citizen science shouldn't have those problems. I find it very frustrating when there's some fantastic person you're working with in the Department of Water and Sanitation. They know your project, they know your work, and then suddenly they are put into another department or another portfolio. And the sort of discontinuity within government is a problem. I don't know if that happens in governments around the world or whether we are particularly bad in that respect. Maybe somebody can give some insights. But I think citizen science, like the Citizen Science Association, should be stable. It's not something that's going to shift around from one minister to another or from one year to another.
Thanks, Jackie. Okay, so back to you, Sharon. I saw the question from Valerie, but I see people are giving answers. It's a good question, Valerie. Are there any grants available for funding available for green jobs in water? I asked this in regard to the fact that there is a gap in monitoring. Surely we could train young people, and Colleen made the important point, green jobs need to be incorporated into the social employment fund of Treasury. But it's an area clearly where there's a need and clearly where there can be advocacy to productively employ people. Sharon, a couple of questions, back to you.
Thank you. Yeah, can you hear?
Yep.
So just going to the first point, I think was Nanette on springs and monitoring. Theoretically, you know, all boreholes and springs should also be monitored. I think as soon as one starts thinking about the scale of things, two things become obvious. One is that a decentralized mode of management becomes absolutely necessary because there's no ways that this can be done at a national scale. Hence, we're making this argument for local level water resource governance, obviously feeding into a broad umbrella of governance. The reality on the ground, again, is that there simply aren't the staff and the resources to do it. And I think this is where it opens up the space again for citizen science. It does depend what sort of monitoring you're talking about, whether it's, you know, it's flow or whether it's water quality. I assumed partly it was water quality stuff. And I think we're beginning to build the skills for that. Groundwork are doing a huge amount of work on this in KZN. So I think we're looking to them for quite a lot of the support around that. I think the second point where Debbie was on your question around an integrated platform. I couldn't agree with you more. I suppose the concern there is once one sort of formalizes and bureaucratizes in a way these things, they somehow have this habit of kind of collapsing over time. So I suppose one of my questions becomes this, you know, how do we sustain this over time? I think that, yeah, that remains always a question. I just saw there was also a comment on polluter pay, so we can answer that at another point, I think. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Excellent. Share your contact details, share your slides if you don't mind as well. And we're about halfway through, people. We've done 4 presenters. We have 4 more presenters to come. And we are turning now to the specifics of pollution and agrichemical contamination. And our first speaker under this section is Debbie Muir, who is going to be talking to us about highly hazardous pesticides, the number that are registered in South Africa, the impact that they have on aquatic ecosystems, with emphasis on atrazine and acrolein, pardon me, and their human health impacts and environmental fate. And Anna will just tell us a little bit about Debbie. Anna?
Thank you, Mark. I just want to say that Debbie, that's Debbie's slides. Sorry, I got a little bit distracted. Debbie just has some of the most acronyms for accredited, and just as a scientist that I've ever seen, her acronyms go on, like a long caterpillar next to her name. She sits on SciChem, which is the Strategic Association for Chemical Integrative Management, I think, something like that, and also the SADC Exco, and she has been integral in writing pesticide policy for the Department of Environment, as well as giving a lot of input for the SADC region. And just one of the things that I love most about Debbie, there's a lot that I love about Debbie. But the Department of Environment was our biggest glyphosate user, a decade or so ago. And since Debbie has come into the department, they have managed to cut their pesticide or their glyphosate use radically. And so that has completely changed. So also just with UnPoison's focus on agrochemicals and pesticides, especially highly hazardous pesticides, the knowledge that Debbie has to share is incredibly important to our movement and to the health of ourselves and our food and the environment that produces our food. Over to you, Debbie. With your speaker on, Debbie.
My bad. Sorry, everybody. I'm not as wonderful as Anna said, I promise. I just work hard. And my main aim is to fix the environment and stop contamination and stop killing the people. So that's my aim. So basically, I'm going to be talking to you about impacts on aquatic ecosystems and human health with regards to highly hazardous pesticides. How do I move my slides? Do I move them there? No. How do you move your slides?
I think it just has a lag. You've moved, there we go, done.
There you go.
Okay, so highly hazardous pesticides pose a significant risk to human health and the environment, especially in developing countries. So with the highly hazardous pesticides, policies were based on the precautionary principle together with the FAO, which is the Food and Agriculture Organization's Code of Conduct, Article 7.5, and the highly hazardous pesticides, I'm going to call them HHPs, otherwise I'm going to run out of words, were identified as a global risk to humans and the environment. And there was a global move that was initiated through SciChem and others to ban or phase out or restrict highly hazardous pesticides. So there has been a move globally to take action against highly hazardous pesticides. So South Africa developed or put together their HHP database, and SADC has developed and ratified their highly hazardous pesticide strategy, which means all 16 member states have signed off and agreed to the HHP strategy. And based on the South African HHP database, it was adopted by SADC, and now SADC is also putting together the SADC database of HHPs. So in South Africa, as we stand, and I can tell you in the last 3 months, by looking at how the pesticides have been registered and coming on, we have moved from 124 HHPs at the end of last year to 186 HHPs currently as we stand of last night when I redid the assessments. And of those 186 HHPs, 102 of them are environmental toxicity or environmental tox HHPs. In other words, they either have an impact on the environment, whether it's water or bees or bioaccumulation in soil, whatever, 102 of them. So out of all the HHPs currently in South Africa, 55% have an impact on the environment. Okay, so then the databases were developed. Now, if we're looking at the environmental risk, out of the 8 criteria that the FAO, WHO Joint Management on Pesticide Management put together to define what an HHP is, criteria 7 and 8 look at the environmental exposures and the impacts on ecosystems. So for this talk, we're just going to be looking at 7 and 8, but I'm going to throw in a little bit on the health impact. So that would be the hazard criterions 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6, which is the carcinogenics, reproductive toxins, EDCs, etc. Okay, so we're going to talk about atrazine and acrolein. Now, atrazine is one of the main agricultural water contaminants or water pollutants, and it's used mainly in the wheat and the corn production areas in South Africa. And acrolein is a favorite pesticide used by Department of Water and Sanitation for the control of algae and fungi and submerged aquatic weeds in their canals. And this is where the alarm bells should be going off, because those canals are carrying your drinking water to you. So, and they are using acrolein in those canals to treat the algae before they put it through the water purification plant and it comes out of your tap. So acutely toxic aquatic organisms, they are acutely toxic to aquatic organisms, and the main ones where the bioaccumulation occurs are in the paramilita, which is the invertebrates, and the fish. So now the fish is another issue when you're looking at rivers and dams with a link to communities which are doing subsistence farming, for instance. So there is also then becomes bioaccumulation through the fish into the human body, which is a problem. Okay, so here is an example of the SADC database. Oops. One more of the SADC database that was put together by UnPoison and the department, and is available on the UnPoison website. The South African one is available on the UnPoison website. This is an example of the SADC database. So it will give you an indication of, on the green columns on the left-hand side are the countries. So there are the 16 member states, and on the right-hand side are the HHPs. And then the blue column in the middle is the aggregates numbers of the HHPs and how many countries have that HHP. And that is would be the criteria for us to be able to identify what the priority pesticides would be for elimination and banning in the SADC region. Okay, so this one you're looking at the moment, this is an excerpt from the South African HHP strategy or HHP database. And so just so that you can see clearer, on the far right-hand side is the comments column, where you can put comments in for hazard criterion 8. Because hazard criterion 8 is the one that has incidents of severe and irreversible adverse effects on health or environment. And this is hazard criterion 8 is more a subjective one, whereas hazard criterions 1 to 7 are objective. They are either WHO 1A or 1B, or they're not. Whereas 8 is where you actually need to look more on research and whether it has become and whether there's sufficient research to prove whether it has a criterion 8. And those are the ones, and as you'll see, that we are still busy finalizing and confirming how many hazard criterion 8 HHPs we have, but we have confirmed that acrolein is an HHP, and it's because it is a WHO 1A and 1B, and it is a marine and water pollutant, and it's reactive and unstable in the environment. And we're going to get to some nasty, shocking things about that shortly. And atrazine is a groundwater contaminant, and it's subject to PIC, which is the annexure 3 of the Rotterdam Convention of Prior Informed Consent, and it's also a water pollutant. Okay, so to start off with, the impact on the aquatic systems, we're dealing with 7 hazard criterion 7. There's 102 HHPs, as I've said, which impacts on ecosystems, mesocosms, and food webs. So the food webs is also where we are now coming out of the water into impacting human health. And the pesticides, and here there's also a link to impacting out of the system into the food web to wildlife impacts, where the pesticides are detected in eggs of African darters and reed cormorants. And those are the examples of some of the HHPs that have been picked up, where we've seen declines in fecundities and reproductive fecundities and mortalities of certain species, where they're not able to reproduce as much, and there's a risk of those species becoming vulnerable. And then impacts over time, there's subtle behavioral changes within animal communities, and there are developmental and reproductive changes. An example of this is that the pesticides used in the Shishlui National Park to control the chromalina have had which are persistent in the sand along the Shishlui River, have increased the temperature of the sand, and by doing that, they have changed the alignment of the sexes of the crocodiles being born. So there are now more males being born than female crocodiles in the Shishlui National Park, which is a concern now, because now the impact on the behavior and the competition with regards to mating in Shishlui National Park and the crocodile populations has been taking a knock. So there's another sort of side or a knock-on effect with regards to pesticides use and impacts in water and soil bioaccumulation. Okay, I don't know how many of you know about the Agricultural Research Council's chemicals of or contaminants of emerging concerns knowledge hub. There is the notice on the bottom. All those green dots, those are atrazine indicators of where atrazine has been picked up in the water. Okay, so atrazine, that is the information that I have on atrazine. You will get the presentation afterwards, but it's bioaccumulative, it's highly toxic, it's persistent in soil, it's leaches, and it's a groundwater contaminant. But here's the scary thing. It's a human corticidin, it's an endocrine disruptor, it's a reproductive and developmental tox, it's a neurotoxicant, it can cause renal failure and coma, it's an irritant, it is a bad pesticide. Okay, when you're looking at the acrolein, for instance, it's used by industry and DWS, so it compounds. It's a pollutant, it's highly volatile, it's persistent in water and soil, it's highly toxic to all of those categories. It's bioaccumulative and it is a chronic tox. And the problem here is it is not considered when the drinking water standards are developed. When the EPA developed the environmental water quality standards, they set the limit at 1.2 micrograms per liter. What is our drinking water quality standard? Not anywhere near that. It's toxicities, it's a carcinogen, reproductive, it causes a respiratory congestion, heart failure. It's fatal if it is inhaled because it's a vapor. If you are exposed through breathing the vapors in from drinking water, so if you're near a river or a treated canal, it is a skin and eye irritant, so your eyes become opaque and cloudy, corneas, and you get epidermal necrosis, And if ingested, your stomach is irritated, you vomit, you get stomach ulcers, and your ulcers can bleed. So the risks posed by HHPs on biodiversity and ecosystem services is unacceptable. Pesticide exposure and environmental waste reduces the acceptable and clean water service delivery to the public and the environment. Pesticide contamination water can lead to reduction in species richness in aquatic mesocosms and systems and decreases in species diversity in aquatic ecosystems. National legislation should be implemented to phase out HHPs immediately to mitigate further harm to the environment and people. And I thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. And thank you for being in government. We need strong, committed, informed people like you in these government departments. We really thank you for that. I see now why I should have known about atrazine and acrolein, which were new to me, because it's very scary what you have just described. And the challenge is to get these agreements implemented, but we can't get these agreements implemented if people don't know about them in the first place. So we've got a few minutes for questions to Debbie. Hands up, anybody who has a question that you'd like to ask for clarification. I did see a couple in the chat. What does it use? What is atrazine used for, and what could replace it? From Jacqui Goldin. Any other questions?
I have a question, Mark. Actually, my question, I would say, actually, is maybe relates more to you. So I'm touching on the presentations from Ferrial up to the compelling presentation from Debbie now, and also tying up the legal one that was done by Katli, and thinking now we see that even with the toughest regulations that we have, it's really maybe not working. So what would you say? I mean, from your experience, you've confronted issues like this. What would you say is like sort of like an overarching needed approach here to make these things happen? Because it doesn't seem that even if we improve our policing, things are going to work. Who must take responsibility for making sure that these things do happen?
Well, maybe we can come to that if we have a few minutes left over. But what I would say, just as an activist listening to these presentations, is that, you know, my starting point is the Constitution says everyone has a right to sufficient water, says everyone has a right to an environment that is good for their health and well-being, or something like that. That there is very, very strong legal mandate to support the arguments that have been made to act, and the duty on government to act, and the negative duty on private corporate powers to be restrained and to be effectively regulated. But it's very difficult to make that happen when we have government which is administratively debilitated at the moment, which lacks capacity, and where there's a lot of corruption. And I think that the corruption under state capture was a major factor in losing 10 years in the type of regulation of clean water that we've heard presented. But the bottom line is that we have to build a movement. We have to build knowledge and awareness. There's a couple of media people here. We've got to get this type of information out into the media, the dangers that people face now, the dangers that people will face in future. And then we have to, once we've got it into the media, make sure that we have effective networks such as the WaterCAN and other organizations that can mobilize people at local levels around water issues and at national levels, and that can make water a national political priority, which it is not at the moment. Most people, I would hazard to say 98% of people in South Africa have no clue of what is being discussed in this webinar, and of its implications for their health and well-being, and for the health and well-being of the environment. it's a whole discussion, Mkhululi, which I think we're going to have to come back to, and which I'd encourage WaterCAN and others to lead us on. But are there any other technical questions to Debbie? Debbie, are there any other points that you would like to just quickly make or respond to, your perspective as a person working in government on how people outside government can help people like you and strengthen your arm inside government is, for example, something that may be relevant to us. Anna, are you wanting to just let
me quickly answer the atrazine. What is it used for? It is probably the most used product in agriculture to control pests on agricultural products. What I didn't say is that atrazine, if you were listening carefully, everybody, but I had to rush because Mark's face came on. So I knew that he was going to rush me. And I wanted to then try go a bit faster, but atrazine bioaccumulates in food. It bioaccumulates in whatever you spray it on. So that means that there is atrazine residues and atrazine transformation products and metabolites in the food you eat. So that was my take home here. So it is in your corn, it is in your maize, it's in your millipop, it's in your and it's in your wheat, in your bread. There will be residues of atrazine. So atrazine also doesn't break down in groundwater, and it is the biggest groundwater pollutant and or contaminant. There are no microbes in groundwater to break it down. So there has been huge increases in childhood cancers in the Northern Cape and in the arid areas where the community subsists off groundwater, and huge increases in cases of ADHD. And all of this is linked to atrazine in the groundwater in the arid areas in this country. And that's just what we know about so far. It's also linked to endocrine disrupting. It's an EDC, it's an endocrine disrupting chemical. So there are hormone imbalances. So it basically is a castor semenya maker. So that's why I'm saying, look carefully at some of these things. Atrazine, yes, atrazine is in the groundwater. Atrazine is in the rivers. Atrazine is everywhere. The same with acrolein. If you are near or live near a canal where you know DWS is spraying acrolein, you will be breathing in those acrolein fumes.
Thanks, Debbie. Anna, very quickly, because we've got 35 minutes left and still 3 speakers.
I just wanted to say that one of the main projects or one of the main initiatives that UnPoison is working on is the banning of HHPs. And one of the ways that we understand to engage with the registrar is to build strong cases to have the science reviewed. So if we can collectively with all of these groups, just to answer some of the questions about how we can actually do this, if a lot of the groups can come together and we can build strong cases made in science and put that to the registrar with stories of victims, etc., it can trigger a review process when the pesticide is up for renewal.
Thank you very much, Anna. Debbie, you could have talked for much longer, and I'm sorry my face appeared and made you speed up. But that was really very important, and thank you. And please, again, put your contact details. I see Ferrial wanting to talk to you and others who will be wanting to talk to you. And let's hope that this, your 10 minutes here, for many of us, rang an alarm bell, and that it will lead to catalyze action beyond Friday afternoon in early November and more urgency to address these issues. So thank you very much. So moving straight on now to James Dabrowski, who will be introduced properly by Anna in a second, but he's going to speak on ecological risk assessment and its resources and its role in the management and regulation of pesticide impacts to water resources. So James will be coming up in a minute, and I'm going to have to get tighter and tighter on our speakers now, colleagues, because I want us to stay together until for and not then start to see people dropping off for the last speaker. So Anna?
Thank you so much, Mark. I will make it brief. James Dabrowski, I've been wanting to meet him for a long time after seeing his work on spray drift and a pesticide map, which I'm sure he will discuss. His work spans being a specialist scientist by the Department of Water and Sanitation, principal researcher by CSIR, and James is an NRF-rated researcher and has led numerous research projects on aquatic ecotoxicology, water quality, and ecological risk assessment. I am very much looking forward to James's talk. Over to you, James.
Hi, good afternoon. I just want to make sure you can all hear me, first of all, and see my presentation.
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's it's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you today. I just want to acknowledge some of the work that I'll be presenting here was done while I was at a research associate at the Freshwater Research Center. And currently I just work for myself as a consultant for my little small company here based in George called Confluent. So yeah, just to give a little bit of background, obviously we all know that South Africa is a very highly developed agricultural economy and uses high quantities of pesticides. And when I refer to pesticides, I'm really talking collectively about insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides. So it's a large group of chemicals used to control pests in agriculture and also in other sectors. I think it goes without saying that there's been many research projects that have been done over time that have shown quite clearly that pesticides do frequently occur in our water resources. And obviously there's a lot of concern about that due to the risk of their toxic effects towards the environment and human health. My focus has always been very much on the aquatic ecosystem, so looking more at aquatic biodiversity. But even though there are obviously risks, there's obviously quite a lot of benefits associated with their use as well, including improved productivity in agriculture, protection of crop losses, vector disease control, as well as control of alien plant species. So there are benefits associated with their use. And like everything that we do in society these days, we need to provide some sort of confidence in the safety or sustainable use of these products so that we can derive their benefits, but at the same time, make sure we don't cause unnecessary harm to human health and the environment. And I just took this little snapshot from the UnPoison website. You can see that there's over 3,000 pesticides registered in South Africa. Many of them are highly hazardous, as we've just heard. And for me, the biggest issue is really related to the regulation of the pesticides in terms of the act that regulates them, which is an act that was first promulgated in 1947. So this is obviously a really old act. And a lot of these issues that we've already heard about and that I just spoke about earlier were highlighted in a draft pesticide management policy that was published in 2006, which highlighted a number of gaps in the sort of in managing pesticides in the environment. It acknowledged that there's a lot of pesticides that have been used, that are being used in the country, many of which have not been reevaluated in terms of their risk to the environment. It acknowledges that there was a requirement for a change in the methodology in order to manage pesticides in the country. And the policy specifically mentioned the need to protect water quality through releasing fewer pesticides and or less toxic pesticides in the environment, as well as to implement practices that would minimize the movement of pesticides into our water resources. So all of those issues that we're talking about are fundamentally addressed in risk assessment. That's what we do in a risk assessment. We look at the risks that pesticides or other chemicals pose in the environment, and we try and establish whether the use of a pesticide, given its recommended use, is going to pose an unnecessary risk to the environment or to human health. So how are risks generally assessed? Well, there's very simply two components of a risk assessment. The one component is an effect assessment. And basically the question you are asking there is, what is the maximum concentration that an organism or ecosystem can be exposed to without experiencing any adverse effect? And we can call this a predicted no effect concentration. So it's a concentration where we're quite happy that there's not going to be any effects associated with that exposure at that concentration. Then what we also look at is an exposure assessment. And the question we're asking there is, what is the concentration that an organism or an ecosystem will be exposed to under typical conditions of use? And we can call that a predicted environmental concentration. So quite simply, if the predicted environmental concentration is lower than the predicted no effect concentration, then we can be reasonably happy that there will not be any risk to the use of that chemical. However, if the predicted environmental concentration is higher than the no effect concentration, well, then we are entering the realm of negative effects towards organisms. So the effect assessments are relatively simple to do in comparison to exposure assessments. They typically use test organisms representing different trophic levels, and they're exposed to varying concentrations of pesticides. And then from that, we can derive toxicity endpoints using dose response curves. So at the bottom here, you can see in this graph, as you get an increase in concentration, the effect that you can see, which may be anything from mortality to any other sort of effect that you're monitoring, increases as the concentration increases. And it's really at this level there in the circle where you can get your predicted no effect concentration. And that's the concentration where we can say, okay, at this concentration, things should be okay. It's in the exposure assessment that is really, in my opinion, quite a lot more complicated. And it's a lot more difficult. And the question we're really trying to answer is how much pesticide is applied, what happens to it after it is applied, and how does it land up in a water resource? So that is complicated by the fact that, as we said, we've got 3,000 different pesticides that are used. They all have varying chemistry. So chemistry is very important. And two examples are half-life. That is how long it takes for a chemical to degrade in the environment. And that can vary from a couple of days to years, depending on the pesticide that you're looking at. The other one is KOC, which is the tendency of a chemical to bind to organic carbon in the soil. So if a chemical has very high KOC, it's basically sticky. So it'll stick to any organic particles in soil or in plants, etc. And so it's therefore not as mobile. It doesn't move as easily in the environment. If your half-life is very long, obviously it's there persistent for a long time, so it's available for movement over a long period of time. So these factors are very important to look at. Then, of course, there's different transport routes, how pesticides move from agriculture areas into water resources. So the main ones are runoff, that's surface runoff. As you can see there at the top, after heavy rainfall, you get the surface wash-off of pesticides that have applied to a field, and they physically wash off from the fields into adjacent rivers. Spray drift is a very important one as well. That occurs during the actual application process. You can see in those two figures there, pictures there where large volumes of the pesticides are released into the air, and that can physically move via wind-driven drift into non-target environments, water resources, but also where people are living. So spray drift is a really problematic one because the concentrations that you're exposed to are immediate and very high, so nothing is taking a chance to break down. And then there are a number of factors that influence all these transport routes as well. A number of environmental factors, such as the application method, is one important example. So you can see in the middle picture, that is a sprayer that is applying pesticide to an orchard. So it has to spray the pesticide up into the trees. So that's why you get these very high plumes up above the trees, and it's very vulnerable to drift. Whereas in the bottom one, it's a boom sprayer that it's applying it to obviously a low crop, and the risk of drift in that scenario is a lot less than the picture above it. But soil characteristics are very important. The climate is important, topography, the slope of the land. There's a number of factors that influence how these pesticides move from their target areas into non-target areas. And so in exposure assessment, at least in the rest of the developed world, what is typically used are exposure assessment models. So they incorporate information on pesticide application, the rate of application, the type of method that is used. They incorporate information on pesticide chemistry. They incorporate information on all those environmental variables that I've mentioned. And these are just some examples. I think often the data requirements can be a lot higher. And then they take all that, these models take all that information in. There's models for spray drift, there's models for runoff, there's models for leaching, and then they give an output in terms of a predicted environmental concentration associated with each of those different transport routes. So a lot of my research focus over time, and I can see Mark has already put up his face there, so I'm going to really have to hurry.
Sorry.
Has really been focusing a lot more on the exposure assessment side of things, and with an aim of really trying to look at using these types of models that are available of pesticides in the country. So one of the things that we did most recently was look at incorporating information of crop census data. We've managed to get pesticide use application data for different types of crops, and then we were able to produce pesticide use maps for the country. So we've managed to produce maps for over 200 active ingredients, showing the relative use estimated application rates of pesticides across the country. This was updated more recently in 2015, where we got more recent pesticide use data, and then we showed the pesticide use based on quaternary catchments in the country. Because obviously, if you want to look at impacts on water resources, it's very important to know what catchments you're looking at. And then added to that, following on from that, we incorporated integrated information on soil type, organic carbon in the soil, topography of the land, and we were able to produce risk maps. So these show relative risk of pesticide use in each quaternary catchment throughout the country to algae, invertebrates, and fish. And if we interrogate those maps, we can go to a map that a quaternary catchment of interest, and we can look at the data associated with that. So for example, we can see this little catchment. It has a very high risk associated to fish species there down in the Western Cape. Many of these fish species in the Western Cape are highly endangered. And so we can get an idea of which pesticides are really contributing mostly to the risk associated with those fish in that catchment. So I'm just going to skip these. I've developed a number of other tools similar to that can be used at different scales. But the main take-home message that I wanted to get at the end of the day was how risk assessment methods are obviously key, the most fundamental process in the pesticide registration process. The EU and the USA rely heavily on exposure assessment models, as I described earlier. And many of these models have been used and tested in South Africa and have been shown to be very reliable in terms of estimating pesticide fate and transport. If we looked at Act 36 of 1947, which is the act that regulates pesticide use in the country, it's largely focused on human health effects and establishment of MRLs for protection of consumers, but it does not utilize any modeling tools to predict exposure in aquatic ecosystems. So it does not provide a realistic assessment of the likelihood of pesticides moving to water resources, and because of that, it does not provide an adequate assessment of risk to non-target environments, and we have no idea to determine buffer widths, example, for what the width of buffer widths should be to protect human health as well as the environment. In the registration process, extensive toxicity data is provided. So they have the toxicity data during the registration. And the main deficiency in terms of the regulation or the risk assessment of pesticides in the current regulation is the lack of any exposure assessment to try and estimate, well, what sort of concentrations can we expect given normal use. And I think just to finally put everything a bit in context, if we go back to the 1940s and look at just what was allowed at the time when this Pesticide Registration Act was first started, you could smoke on aeroplanes. In San Antonio in Texas, they sprayed DDT throughout the streets because they thought it was the cure for polio at that time. Construction workers would give present-day health and safety operators heart attacks by the way they did their work. Computers looked like giant abacuses. And apartheid was started in 1948. So, a lot has changed in that time. And I think it's about time the act that regulates the registration of these highly toxic chemicals should also change by this stage. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And sorry
James.
for going over a bit too long.
You're forgiven. I'm afraid I don't know if I was load shed or something, but I lost about 5 minutes of you whilst I was thrown out and getting back in. But I can see how powerful and evidence-packed your presentation was. So thank you very much.
Mark, can we
yes.
ask all the questions to come into the chat, and I will make sure that they go to the speakers and then it gets circulated to the entire guest list. I don't want to cut any of our other speakers short. And also just want to say I'm happy to stay an extra 10 minutes so that our speakers don't feel too rushed either, and we get the full value of what they have to share. So without further ado, if you don't mind, I'm going to introduce Bettina, who has over 35 years experience in the field of environmental health aspects and water quality. Her key areas of expertise include health risk assessment, water quality, microbiology, and molecular biology. And she has led research on water quality and health since 1988 and been an advisor to the World Health Organization, the United States EPA, etc. And Mark, you can introduce her topic and off Bettina can go.
Thank you very much, Anna, for overthrowing me. So Bettina is going to give a general overview of contamination of water resources from agricultural chemicals and possible associated environmental health risks in South Africa. And thank you very much for Bettina. And yeah, there's no need to rush. We're also recording this. And so we want to make sure that people who watch the recording are able to get the full benefit. So you have your full 10 minutes. Yeah, go for it. Thank you.
For the rush. Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Okay. And I'm hoping that you can actually see. Okay, there we go. Yeah, okay. So it's still a rush, even if I have got my full 10 minutes. I'm going to give you a general background. I focus on the human health risks. James has spoken about the ecological health risks, which is, yeah, the slightly different endpoints, but very similar approaches. And what I wanted to stress is that it isn't just that we have agriculture contaminating our water resources, but we also have our water resources contaminating or getting into our food supplies as well through the irrigation of that. So it's a multi-pathway process that I want people to just remember and keep in mind, that we have got this kind of integrated cycle and system. So I've got a few kind of shocking bits of data that I wanted to show people. But here it's just a case of showing you just how complicated or how complex, not complicated, and interactive the whole kind of pathway from different types of pollutants and how that gets to the endpoints of either humans or the ecosystem. This was something that I came across in a presentation that I was very surprised at, and I had only heard about it through one of the kind of like conferences, and it really shocked me, because it was a case of going, not just that food had been tested, but wastewater that had been partially treated. And we know that carbamazepine, which is one of these pharmaceuticals, that is the anti-epileptic type of pharmaceutical, it is found in all the different drinking waters have had traces of carbamazepine found in it. If we find a pharmaceutical in our treated waters, it will be carbamazepine will be one of them that is present. So that was why I specifically chose this, just to give you sort of background information. But the wastewater has some of the carbamazepine in it because the treatment works aren't made to reduce it. That is used to irrigate our foods. We eat the food. Then people's urine was tested who ate that food and found carbamazepine in it. So it isn't just a case of that the food was tested. It was proven that it was that people were actually having exposure to this carbamazepine. Now what we also have is the breakdown products. It's not just the carbamazepine, but the metabolites, and looking at all the different types of vegetables that were irrigated with this wastewater and seeing what are the levels of the different types of crops. And it's not just your tomatoes, or it's not just this. This was found all over the place with all the different types of vegetables that have been irrigated, and you can see this is a lot. Even in things like pears, or so you have your leafy vegetables, you have all your different types of vegetable groups, and this is being found. And what really kind of clinched it for me was the comparison. They did a proper case control study, a proper scientific assessment of this. Look at on the left-hand side, this is the urine concentration, or the urine carbamazepine levels in the people, the number of days after they've eaten the food that has been irrigated with it. On the right-hand graph, it's been a control group where they've been eating food that was irrigated with clean water that didn't have any traces of the pharmaceutical carbamazepine in it. Now, this alone, I think, is one of the major issues that I thought I wanted to get this message across. But obviously, it isn't just pharmaceuticals. We have, and Debbie has mentioned that James has worked his career in pesticides. We have got so many different amounts of pesticides. So in 2013, we had 500 different pesticides with active ingredients registered for the use. Now, Debbie, I don't know exactly if this corresponds to the data that you have as well, but it seems to be a few different types of databases with these sources of data, and we might find slight variations. But when I was looking and updating this in 2017, from 2013, we had 500, and by 2017, we had 700 different pesticides. And then you've got all the different ingredients, but specifically, they focus on the active ingredient. But in addition to that, we have our inert ingredients. And that was one of the problems with it's now becoming infamous, glyphosate, or Roundup, which is also, it was touted as being the perfectly safe pesticide to be used anywhere, and people would be really, really safe. And Sharon shared a video with me just a week ago with horrific information in the US. Anyway, billions of dollars are being paid out now because of the cancer and the endocrine disrupting effects that Roundup is being shown to have. And one of the major problems that it went missing was it was only the active ingredients that needed to be tested and not the complete formula. So yeah, we've got a lot of problems that we're needing to deal with. Then what I wanted to show in this slide was just that there's so many different databases where we do have information, but it's also, I mean, it just takes so much money and so much time to go through all these various tests that I don't know how we're ever going to catch up and have the various pesticides or compounds looked at and assessed properly. So we've got the gray is in this slide is showing you the gray portions is the not available data for endocrine disruption. So you'll see mostly unavailable information. For cancer, the things have been processed and tested far more diligently. We also have a database that has got the name TEDx, which has got nothing to do with TED Talks. It is the Endocrine Disruption Exchange List database. That is where the TEDx comes from. But unfortunately, they haven't been able to get the funding to keep on supporting this. This was started by Rachel, what I can't remember her surname now, the one who really started setting up off the environmental pollution research in the US. Island Spring. She was
Carson.
Yeah, that's it. So this had been started by her, and unfortunately, the information is, or the support for it, isn't available anymore. I've got photographs or screenshots of the projects that James has worked on, and I was part of some of that research, and just looking at how do we decide whether pesticides or agricultural chemicals might be harmful to human health. We've got all the different databases, as I've mentioned. This is from James's maps as well that he produced. And here, atrazine, as you mentioned, Debbie, it was like, it's one of the worst. And here's the map showing the pesticide use or atrazine application rates per district municipality. I actually thought that, James, you would be presenting this as well. But I just find it really useful to be able to highlight the kind of areas, or to identify those areas where we have the biggest concern. I would really be interested to try and do the other pesticide that you mentioned, Debbie, and see where that comes up, the acrolein. We looked at the environmental health, which is not ecological health. Environmental health means human health exposed through the environment. And we found various types of, let me just see if I can get rid of this. Oh, you're popping up. No, I'm going to be very quick. Okay, so we had 3 different pesticides showing up, and atrazine was one of them. And Riolette, who I see was in the audience here, she also worked on that, and there was things like anti-androgenic activity as well as estrogen activity. I'm not going to go into detail, just to say I've done the actual human health risk assessment calculations for these things, and you have different ways of dealing with it with different formula. And luckily, from the water perspective, what we found was that the levels were not particularly causing a human health problem from the water side, but from the air side, it was getting there. And that was also when we added, you have the spray drift in particular that James had mentioned, that was a problem. And this was using a health risk assessment process that was typical. And this is the information that's available in the report. I also looked at the Western Cape, for the Western Cape government, trying to identify areas that had, needed focusing on to protect them from this, and using James's method, looking at all the district municipalities and the types of crops used from the maps and the information that James has in the report. You find out how much pesticide would be used, and you can work that out. Got it? Got it. And this is what comes out. Now, this is the last point I'm trying to make, is what is the cost of inaction when we're talking about endocrine disruption? And there's finally, people have been doing investigations there, and the costs are huge. So you have your endocrine disruption. You have, here we're showing, we know it causes obesity, diabetes. We've got male and female reproductive issues that are coming up. And you have someone Leonardo Trasandi, who's from New York, and I've met him at one of our conferences that we had. I'm just so grateful that he's been looking into this, and he started a while ago. And this is the type of costs that are being calculated. We are talking about, just from, say, hundreds of millions of euros per annum can be attributed to endocrine disruption from environmental exposure, just for the male. For the females, we're talking billions. So we went from millions to billions of euros per annum. And then we've got, look at the next one, the neurological behavioral deficits. We've got in the 157 billion. It is just too much to contemplate. We've got thousands of these different contaminants. We've got water as being a really important pathway. We've got the costs, and this is just the 2 things that I really wanted to make sure that we're stressed here, of the amount of money that we have, never mind for that we need to treat, which people will say, treat the water, remove the compounds. But what happens if we don't, is because it's too expensive, Well, we're treating the causes. I mean, the outcomes. That is what is happening. And that is my last slide.
Bettina, thank you very much for a very powerful and shocking presentation, building on what James has just told us. Again, I hope you'll share the presentation, share your contact details. We're not going to have time for questions now, although we are asking for questions in the chat. Yeah, one of my big take homes from what you've just presented is the cost benefits and the cost of not intervening. And that's always very important when we're trying to persuade government to do something. That is, unless they are reconciled to not actually treating the ill health effects that people get through environmental and water exposure. But thank you very, very much for that. Another wake-up call. So we're now going on to our final presentation of this afternoon. Professor Leslie Petrik, topic, the findings of her research on various contaminants, including pesticides in the marine environment this time and in marine biota. If I pronounced that right, this is not an area of science that I'm particularly familiar with. But Leslie, or rather Anna, to just quickly introduce Leslie, and let's hear this presentation. Anna.
Sure. I think we are saving the best for last, the best amongst the best. Leslie leads the Environmental and Nano Sciences research group in the Department of Chemistry at the University of Western Cape. She is an award-winning, internationally recognized expert in the field of material science, nanotechnology, chemistry, environmental remediation, water treatment, and the benefication of industrial waste. So really, really privileged to have Leslie among us with all of our incredible speakers. Over to you, Leslie. Just need to unmute your mic. Leslie, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but your mic is still muted.
Hi, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, well, I've lost it now. I don't know where it's gone. Can you see that now?
We can't see the presentation. We can see your screen.
Okay, let me try again.
Now it's coming.
There we go.
Okay, I can't put it on full screen. Is that on full screen now?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Can you hear me and see me? That's fine. So I'm going to be talking to you about the impacts of persistent chemicals on our marine environment. I'm from the Environmental and Nano Sciences group at the Department of Chemistry at UWC, and these are some of the students' work that I'll be presenting. I want to specifically address the problem of sewage, and this is a map of the nitrogen and pathogen inputs into the ocean of a study of 135,000 watersheds. My screen has jumped. Can you still see full screen?
No.
We can see your screen, but you're not in presenter view, and it doesn't really matter. You can just go to the next slide if that works better.
I don't know why this is not messing up. Can you see that screen now of the marine outfalls in the surf zone?
Yes, we can.
Okay, yep. So this is the situation in Cape Town in terms of the effluents, well, the volumes that are being treated at our wastewater treatment plants. So you can see there are the marine outfalls where there's basically no treatment. And then, for instance, the Cape Flats wastewater treatment plant that is treating 161 megaliters per day, etc. The fact that these wastewater treatment plants are not working well is very well known. Here is the photograph by Jean Trespan of the mess that Potsdam wastewater treatment plant is making because it's not working properly. And the consequences of these failures of our wastewater treatment plants are very real, as you can see from these images taken at Milnerton Lagoon. The microbial pollution from sewage is extensive, and even our Know Your Coasts report by the City of Cape Town shows how the microbial pollution is affecting our beaches. And we all know how many beaches were closed over the last season. The trouble with all of this is, of course, the growing antibiotic resistance. We did some stormwater sampling in Fishhook, and we found that all isolates, all 35 isolates were antibiotic resistant. And you can see the percentages of antibiotic resistance that we found there. This has been published, and I really would suggest that you read this because this is a public health disaster that is coming upon us and going to make it extremely difficult to protect people from infections. But I'm not going to be speaking to you about the microbial pollution as much as the chemical pollution. It's known worldwide that drinking water is contaminated, and I've got studies from South Africa too showing our drinking water contains these chemicals. And this is because we're basically waging chemical warfare at home. Everything that happens to us these days, we counter with a chemical. And we're also the recipient of many pesticides from other countries. Here's a map, for instance, of banned pesticides from the EU that are ending up in countries like South Africa. And all of these chemicals fall under the class of chemicals of emerging concern. They've got several names: endocrine disrupting chemicals, or persistent organic pollutants, or emerging contaminants. And I just want you to look at the bottom picture there. That is more or less the process that these samples have to go through to be analyzed. You need to get hold of the sample. You have to freeze dry it and extract it. Then you have to elute it through a column with SPE cartridges, and then you have to analyze it on a GC mass spec or a HPLC mass spec with standards and quality control measures. So it's not simple. So the data I'm going to show you now has been acquired with great difficulty. But just first to say that we're importing a huge amount of these chemical pollutants, and this is the Department of Environmental Affairs graphic. The impact of these compounds are basically as follows, and we heard Bettina speak about that. I just wanted to point you out to our latest spermatology study, where we've been having a look at the effect of sulfur methoxazole, which is an antibiotic, on oyster sperm mobility and motility. And you can see the effect there. It really does affect the sperm of these broadcasting species. So our question was, do these CECs escape through wastewater treatment plants? And this is a study that I was involved with Bettina in 2016 and Chris Swartz. And we basically studied those 4 wastewater treatment plants that basically had treatment trains as shown above there, except for the Beaufort West plant, which has also got ultrafiltration, reverse osmosis, and UV peroxide on it. This is a study of the perfluorinated compounds done by my student Adiola Adelaide, and showing you the structure of these perfluorinated compounds. These compounds are used in firefighting foams and in waterproofing of clothes and in paints, etc. They're ubiquitous and they're extremely toxic. And you can see here, depending on when we sampled, we found these compounds in the influent and in the effluent of the wastewater treatment plants. We then went and did a coastal survey at about 10 different sites around the coast. I'm only going to show you a fraction of our data, but please go and look at our papers. And we sampled limpets, mussels, sea urchins, starfish, top shells, various species of fish and various species of seaweeds for about 25 compounds. And you can see there amongst that I haven't listed the pesticides, but we also looked at the pesticides. Here are the qualities of the seawater and the biota at the marine outfalls. I'm not going to go in detail there, just suffice to say that we found about everything that we were looking for in these various biota and in the seawater and in the sediments. The levels in the seawater was quite low. The sediments was about an order of a magnitude higher, and in the biota getting up to 2 to 3 orders of magnitude higher. Having a look at those perfluorinated compounds, you can see that the seawater had most of them present. When we looked at the sediments, 2 orders of magnitude higher. And when we looked at the biota, I want you to notice that this is now milligrams per gram, not nanograms per gram. The previous data was nanograms per gram. And we're finding that these compounds are in all the invertebrates that we sampled and the seaweeds. And I just want to point out here that at the same time as we sampled these for the perfluorinated compounds, we also sampled them for the other pharmaceutical compounds, and the pharmaceuticals were also present and the pesticides. So each one of these biota had as many compounds as we tested in them and bioaccumulating. Here are the seaweeds data. Here's the fish fillets for the perfluorinated compounds and the pharmaceuticals. You can see that we found very high levels of diclofenac in snook fillets, for instance, but all the perfluorinated compounds were also present in these fish. Here are the herbicides in the same fish species, and you can see that we found simazine, atrazine, allochlor, metallochlor, and butachlor in fillets, livers, gills, and intestines, depending on the type of fish. And as Bettina showed, it shows you that these chemicals from sewage are coming back to us, to our food. And you're very welcome to go and read more about our water stories. But my talk today really is to address the disadvantages of conventional wastewater treatment technologies, which is basically the limited capability for complete removal of solids, large amount of toxic sludges, capital intensive, and it does not remove microbes and complex intermediates. And a large quantity of these persistent pollutants are not removed, as our study showed. So we can see that sewage is a significant source of chemical and microbial pollution, and that many of these compounds escape through the wastewater treatment plants. And the extensive presence in the coastal waters reveals that primary and secondary processes at wastewater treatment plants are inadequate to remove these compounds, and they're not designed to remove these compounds. And the recalcitrant of these persistent pollutants require new strategies for their removal. And these were the primary compounds. So we were finding unmetabolized medication in these fish. We haven't even started looking at the metabolites. So we need secondary breakdown intermediates to be measured, and we need simplicity and speed for treating large volumes of water. So how can we do that? So we've looked at various solutions. We've looked at nanofilters to remove these compounds, and we actually got fairly good removal of some of these compounds. Here is, for instance, an example of rhodamine dye. We looked at absorption, granulated activated carbon. This is the standard for industry and what is being planned for the reuse facility. It looks wonderful, seems to remove everything, but the trouble is that it depends how you present the data. This is for these pharmaceuticals. This study didn't look at bed volumes. It didn't do breakthrough monitoring. It didn't look at the differing qualities of granulated activated carbon. Regeneration problems maintained, and you've got sludge that you need to dispose of, which is highly toxic. And basically, you're merely shifting the problem from the aqueous phase to the solid phase. There's no degradation, and this kind of absorption is entirely pH dependent. As you can see here, we made a novel adsorbent trying to get rid of sulfur methoxazine, and that actually was pH dependent. You needed to get rid of it at a pH of 3. And it's very unlikely that a granulated activated carbon bed is going to run at a pH of 3. So one of the other solutions we've been looking at is the tertiary stage advanced oxidation processes. Now, remember, all of these are end of pipe solutions, and I think that we're going to have to move up the pipeline to the top of the process to try and remove these compounds, because it's very difficult to implement these processes. We've looked at a variety of these advanced oxidation processes, from photocatalysis, which works better than UV by itself. And I want people to notice that, because UV is often touted as the way to remove these compounds. It doesn't. When you add a photocatalyst to it, you can remove some of these compounds, but it's a very slow process with a very slow throughput. You can use hydrogen peroxide as an oxidant, and it does break down some of these compounds, but you can see that it doesn't do a very thorough job of it at all, and you need to know what you're busy doing. We use the dielectric barrier discharge system, which basically creates a plasma to break down these compounds. And it's pretty effective, and you can combine that with the photocatalyst. You can see the red line shows you the electrohydraulic discharge process. And these systems are already being produced in quite large scale. I've just been to a conference in China where they are developing very interesting versions of these types of equipment, and they really work quite fast. You can see that the compounds are removed after about 60 minutes compared to the extensive time needed by the photocatalyst. And then we've developed a new system called a hydrodynamic cavitation system. And that system is basically a mechanical system that works on breaking down the water molecule and creating free radicals in a cavitation that forms. And that system works pretty well for some of these pollutants. As you can see, one is able to remove quite a few of them to a reasonable amount. And this system can do large volumes quickly, and it's very simple to operate. These systems are also already being used commercially for various purposes, and they can be repurposed for water treatment. So for conclusion on solutions, these organic molecules are very recalcitrant, and you have to do the job properly if you want to get rid of them. Membranes and adsorption work, but they cause fouling and sludges that need to be removed or regenerated. Photocatalysis works, but it's slow and it needs light activation. You need high free radical generation for rapid kinetics. One of the best solutions, I think, is hydrodynamic cavitation, because there's no sludge formed and it's capable of scaling. One has to be very clear that degradation does not equal removal. You need to have a look for your secondary breakdown intermediates to be sure that you've actually removed these compounds. And basically, overall, my recommendations would be that we really need to look at antibiotic resistance due to the pharmaceutical pollution. It's a very much bigger problem than plastic pollution and needs urgent attention globally. Our wastewater treatment plants are completely ineffective to remove these modern pharmaceuticals. The biodegradability of pharmaceuticals should be established before commercialization as a precautionary principle. And our study has shown that over-the-counter drugs are not harmless and persist extremely, and pharmacists and medical staff need to be made aware of the pollution that their prescriptions are causing. And we really need extended producer responsibility to prevent pollution, and take-back policies need urgent attention. So that's just some of the things that I would like to put before you today. Thank you very much, and any questions?
Yeah. Leslie, thank you very much for a brilliant presentation. Thank you. I love the way you acknowledged your students and researchers throughout, but critical information. Debbie, I see you have your hand up. I'll allow only you because we're out of time by 15 minutes already. But just one very quick question.
Okay, it's very quick. Leslie, did anybody look at any of your solutions with regards to the Cornubia disaster? And if your answer is no, please contact me.
My answer is no, and I will contact you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
So people, There are 39 people still standing. We had 50 something, but most of us stayed for most of the time. It's been a very, very information-packed 2.5 hours, and I have learned a huge amount in these 2.5 hours, but I've also been, I don't want to say depressed, I've been enraged, and I've been motivated to act. I think the way this webinar has combined the best of science and scientists and data collection and data analysis with citizen science, with activists, with community organizers has been marvelous. 20 years ago, I was part of the treatment action campaign that seemed like it had a massive task at the very beginning of getting millions of people access to treatment. But that combination of activism and science and evidence and law was successful at the end of the day. What it hasn't solved, I understand after listening to Leslie, is the problem of antiretroviral pollution and pharmaceutical pollution, which I now understand much better after this afternoon. I guess my appeal to all of us who are still here is this webinar has been a wake-up, but we haven't had a chance to properly discuss how we work and organize together to address the issues and the challenges and the crisis. This crisis that is part of our present, but can only get worse and worse and more apparent, particularly if we do not act. So I really want to ask the UnPoison, our water network, and the Community Action Network, and other activists here to come up with a plan so that we can have a discussion about how to mobilize and create awareness and to create action on these issues. This is the second meeting I've been in like this. I think in 2.5 weeks, the University of Johannesburg organized a very, very good 2-day meeting on issues of water safety, water supply, water access. But actually, we need to start to get everybody in the same room, all the right people in the same room, and not to be duplicating our efforts. So that's my appeal. I would like to thank Anna in particular for pulling this webinar and meeting together, and for providing us really with such a fantastic group of speakers and such an informed afternoon. Anna, thank you so much, and thank you for the work that UnPoison is doing, and all strength to you in your efforts on this. I don't know if you'd like to say the parting words to this conference. I feel loath for us all to leave without a discussion about the way forward, but I also know that everybody's up against time constraints, so that is going to have to be for another day. But let that another day be soon.
Thank you, Mark.
Anna.
Just say a very quick word. I've gone cold by the end of this webinar. But one of the reasons for hosting webinars like this is to break down the silos between all of these experts and incredible people that are doing the work. So to bring everybody together to share the knowledge and information allows, I've just seen a lot of cross-pollination, projects being pulled together, etc. So this is an appeal to all of the water experts and people working in water. We've just set up a new UnPoison Our Water WhatsApp group to bring the experts together so they can share knowledge, information, collaborate, and cross-pollinate on projects and dissolve the silos. Thank you to the incredible speakers. Most of you didn't know me, they hadn't heard of UnPoison before, so thank you for trusting this platform with your time, energy, passion, and knowledge. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully harnessing some of the collective knowledge so that the work that you all do can be amplified together. Thank you very much, everybody. Adios.